Hello everybody, it's time for another album review. It's been a little bit since I've done one, but for this one's monumental for me because this is a review of one of my personal favorite bands, and as you can tell in the title of the video, this is the review of the new Cannibal Corpse album, A Skeletal Domain. Now this album's set to come out tomorrow, technically in like less than 3 hours at the time I'm recording this video. So yeah, but there was already a sample up on YouTube, so I figured I'd check it out and examine it, and after I was done I'd come on here and review it. And we're about to find out how, after 2 years since Torture came out, how much has the band changed, and how much have they changed now that they're getting older, now that Corpse Grinder and Alex Webster, Rob Barrett, and Paul the drummer are in their mid-40s, while Pat, he's going to near 50. So yeah, that is a big case to see. Now that they're getting older, are they still producing powerful music? So, and for those out there who don't know who Cannibal Corpse are, I'm going to give a brief history lesson for you. Cannibal Corpse started in the late 80s out of the ashes of some local Buffalo heavy metal bands like Tyrant Sin, Beyond Death, Dark Deception, Leviathan, bands along those lines. Where in Tyrant Sin you had Chris Barnes and Paul Mazurkiewicz and Bob Rousay. And then on Beyond Death, you had Jack Owen and Alex Webster. And in Leviathan, you had Chris Barnes in there. And in Dark Deception, you had Rob Barrett. So those are all the members of some of the old members and current members of Cannibal that were in those bands. But when those bands broke up, the members of those bands that would become Cannibal Corpse would be Barnes, Rousay, Paul, Jack, and Alex. All 5 of them formed their own band, jamming out to some songs, and then they came up with the name of the band, Cannibal Corpse, particularly Alex, but it was just such a genius name that they kept it. Made a demo, and in their first show they did together, they opened for LA Thrasher's Dark Angel, which is a monumental show for them when they got to open for a band who was pretty big at one point during that era in like 89. And then after that they get a contract to sign with Metal Blade Records by Brian Slagle and Mike Faley. A year later, 1990, they go to More Sound Studios because they listen to death metal albums such as Altars of Madness by Morbid Angel, Leprosy by Death, Slowly We Rot by Obituary, Piece of Time by Atheist, Sepultura's Beneath the Remains. Bunch of albums around that time that came out at More Sound. They listened to them and they wanted to know who produced them albums and where was it done. And they found out it was done by Scott Burns at More Sound, and so the band decided to go on a road trip to go down to More Sound so they can record their first CD. And they did in their first album, which I actually have in my collection, Eden Back to Life, and it was a great debut for them. And then they slowly evolved their sound, starting out as more of a thrash-influenced death metal band to a more straightforward death metal band, even with some progressive technical stuff in their songs as well. They first went through a big change after the release of Tomb of the Mutilated when Bob Rousay left the band, and Rob Barrett from Dark Deception, and at the time was in Malevolent Creation, came in and took over that spot as second guitarist. That lineup made arguably their best album, The Bleeding, and it was a great, phenomenal album for the death metal genre. But then after that, Chris Barnes, the singer, would leave and form 6 Feet Under, and that led to them getting George Corpse Grinder Fisher on another phenomenal album, Vile. Then after that, Rob Barrett left the band, and then they got Pat O'Brien, who played in bands like Nevermore and Monstrosity, and he came in as the second guitar player, and that lineup would make albums such as A Gallery of Suicide, Bloodthirst, Gore Obsessed, and The Wretched Spawn. After The Wretched Spawn, original member Jack Owen left the band to join, to work on his side project Adrift, and then he would later join fellow death metalers Deicide afterwards. And then, around that time, they got Jeremy Turner from Origin to play the tour with them, but then he would leave the band and Rob Baird returned, and that's been the lineup since the Kill album. That's been the lineup: George, Corpse Grinder, Alex, Paul, Pat, and Rob. And that lineup, since Kill, they've put out some really awesome, really good discs. In fact, Torture at the time was considered their best album in a little while, but we're going to find out if Skeletal Domain topped it. So we kicked off the album with an epic intro to the song High Velocity Impact Spatter. And that intro kind of reminds me a lot of the introduction to the song Meat Hook Sodomy from Butchered at Birth 13 or 23 years ago. And this album, or actually no, what am I saying? This song took me by surprise big time. It was a phenomenal song to kick off everything for the disc. It was just awesome, well put together. The guitars were smoking, and the drums. And also they've noted that this album has had more blast beats on a Cannibal album probably in a long ass time. If I can remember, the last Cannibal album that I can remember that had a lot of blast beats was probably, I would say, Vile, or maybe even to Gallery of Suicide or Bloodthirst. One of those three. But that song was ripping, and then the next track it led into was Sadistic Embodiment. I already did the track review for that song, but to put it in short, simple terms, it was a great lead single to get into this album because it really had a brutal thrash influence on it that made it very, very good, and I really liked it. So there you go. But Killer Become was a track that really had a lot of different elements going on. You had a lot of fast pace, but you had a lot of slow build, where times in the songs it would build up into the fast parts, starting from the slow parts that were really intricate, and it would lead into the fast stuff, and just sheer brutality overall. The title track of Skeletal Domain was another phenomenal track on this album because it had a real dark and dense and brutal atmosphere to it. Headlong into Carnage was a solid track. I liked it, but that was one of only a few tracks that didn't really hit me hard enough. But then it all went into, probably in my opinion, the best song on the album, The Murderer's Pact, and it's the longest song of the album, a little over 5 minutes. And wow, you talk about some brutality mixed in with some darkness, mixed in with some intricate stuff. Wow. Murderer's Pact was just a phenomenal track for this disc. And then it followed up to another great one, a couple of great ones afterwards, Funeral Cremation, Ice Pick Lobotomy. And I'll talk about more about how those tracks were in a little bit when I get to the overall details. But the next 3 tracks were solid, but not really ones that really hit me good enough, but they were still really good songs and I liked them. Vector of Cruelty, Bloodstained Cement, and Asphyxiate to Resuscitate. I thought those were solid tracks, but they just weren't really ones I would probably go back and listen to too much, unless it starts to grow on me. And I can definitely tell when I listen to this album again down the road, those tracks will grow. But we end off with a great closing song, Hollowed Bodies. Another very dark song. But overall, with this album, the atmosphere of it was dark, dense, and brutal. I mean, this has been considered probably the darkest Cannibal album in quite some time. And then again, all their albums are dark, but with like some of the lyrical ideas and how the guitar melodies were very dark, that led to it. Evil, darkness, and depth. vibe to it, it really made this album much more powerful for me. The production on this album was solid. I really, really liked the production. Mark Lewis, I knew he had what it took to do good because he's worked on stuff for like Job for a Cowboy and Trivium and 6 Feet Under. And for Deicide, I mean, the guy's been very, very good at what he does on the production console. And I think he did an excellent job with this CD. The guitar performance, loved it. I mean, Pat and Rob are two excellent players, especially Pat. Like, Pat, I'm sure he co-wrote a lot of the very brutal, like, technical progressive kind of songs that were on this album. Probably songs like Murderous Pact and Bloodstained Cement and songs like that. But Rob has a great thick rhythm sound in the background that you hear on the album. And some of the guitar melodies that you would hear on occasion on this CD were very, very dark, evil, and wow. The drum performance by Paul, he's definitely not showing any signs of slowing down, even though he's getting older and he's in his mid-40s. He can still blast, he can still go double bass, he can still play thrash stuff. The guy can still kill it on the drum kit. Corpse Grinder's vocals still haven't been waning. He still has that brutality to him with the highs and the low voices that he does. And there you go. Overall, this was a really, really good disc. I'll say it's a great CD. Though, I'm not going to say it's album of the year, but it's up there in like the definitely top 10 at this moment. Maybe like number 6. But this was a great CD. 9 out of 10. There were no songs on this album that I thought was poor. Second half of the album, though, I don't go back to too much because it didn't hit me as hard, but it's a very minor complaint. While I say they're solid tracks, they just weren't ones that hit me immediately, but I say once people like myself and others who review and listen to the CD revisit it, it will grow. I definitely guarantee it. So 9 out of 10 for Cannibal Corpse's Skeletal Domain. Do I think it topped Torture? I'm going to go on the limb and say it did by a very slim margin, though, because Torture was a really good disc, but I thought this was a little bit better than Torture. Simply put, because of how the atmosphere was with some of the song intros, like in High Velocity, Impact Spatter, and Funeral Cremation. So, there you go. I'll also even go as far as to saying this is probably the best Cannibal album I've heard overall since Vile, but you've had some really good stuff in between, like Bloodthirst and Kill, Evisceration Plague, and Torture, and hell, even Wretched Spawn. I mean, you still have had good albums come out between Vile and now, but this, I think, was the best overall album since Vile. For me, personally. But, that's my review of Cannibal Corpse's Skeletal Domain. And that does it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. The next album that I will attempt to review, I'll have to think on it because there are so many more that I've got reviewed that have already come out. Thinking about either checking out the new Dragon Force, the new Godsmack, Goat Whore, Septic Flesh, Anathema, Vader, Hell Yes, Sabaton, Massacre, Iced Earth, or Throwdown. Those are some of the albums I have on my list of albums to check out that have already come out, because there's still plenty of more left that haven't come out yet, like Godflesh, The Agonist, even some highly anticipated discs like At the Gates' new album, which is going to be monumental for me, Obituary, and that's going to be another one, Slipknot as well, and Exodus, and Cavalera Conspiracy, and also Beyond Creation and Sick of It All, and other albums along those lines. So we've got plenty more left before we get to the top 15 albums list near the end of the year. But it's going to be a tough list for me to make, because so far with the, I would say like 13, 14 albums I reviewed, it's going to be tough to put them in order. But anyways, people, peace and rock on!